Hi there, welcome back to 355 Code. So this is the second video in our DDR tutorial, Dance Dance Revolution. And last time what we did is basically learned how to create a random arrow and animate it so that it flies up. And now the next step is going to be to start listening for pressing down on the arrow keys and to match that and see if we struck the correct key. So the way we're going to do that is, before we do that, we are going to need to make sure that we are setting up an interval for our creating our arrow rows. Because as you can see now, we just have the same row kind of going over and over again, but we actually want different arrows each time. And to do that, we need to create different rows with our randomizer. So if you don't understand anything I'm saying, you might want to check out the first video. But if you're okay, then just jump in and you can continue with us from here. So let's create a new function. And this function is going to be called, let's just call it create game. Or let's just call it start game. And this, in this function, basically what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set an interval. And so here at the end of the interval, we need a certain amount of time. So let's say we're going to create a new row every second. Okay, and in this set interval, we are going to call our create row function. Okay, so we're not going to call it outside anymore. We're going to call it in this start game function. So, sorry, here there should be an equal sign. Great, so let's see, and now let's call here start game on the bottom. And let's see what happens here. Okay, so you see we have different arrows coming up, but we also have our old arrows in there as well. So we're getting a little bit of an overload here on the arrows. So what I'm going to do, which would have been good practice anyways, is to remove these arrow elements once they fly up past our row, our board row. Okay, because we don't really need them anymore, and then we're just kind of like overloading the DOM with these arrows. So we're going to do that right here when we create each row. I'm actually going to set a timeout. So let's set a timeout. And this timeout is basically going to, and let's set it, let's say at, I don't know, for now I'll set it at 2000. So basically it'll stop after this animation stops. And all these timings we might adjust later on. So this is just for now. And we're going to remove this new row. And this basically removes it from the DOM. The element does not exist anymore. So let's try running our code now. Okay, so it still seems a little buggy over here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to extend the translate here. So let's translate 5,000 and let's make the duration also 5,000. So we're keeping out the same ratio, and let's turn this into a 5. And that way hopefully the arrows will be way gone by the time we remove them, and we shouldn't see any of that buggy behavior. So let's try that again. Okay, so it looks like we're getting random arrows. Okay, I still saw that bug over here. Yeah, just the arrows kind of appearing out of nowhere. Okay, so let's try extending this even a little more. So let's translate, I don't know, 10,000 pixels. That should be way larger than any screen. And 10,000 here, and we're gonna set the timeout after keep it after 5,000 over there. And now it seems to be running pretty smoothly. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next thing, which will be setting up our event listener for key down press. So we're going to add this event listener right here when we create the start game. So basically what we want to do is add this event listener to the document because we want our entire screen, you can think of it as listening for these these key presses down. Okay, it's not a specific place, it's not a specific element. Okay, so we're going to add an event listener, and this is going to be for key down. Okay, so that means any key that we press down, we are going to trigger an event. And let's create a function, and we'll call it handle key down. And this is basically what's going to run anytime that we press a key. So let's see, const handle key down, and this will be a function. And for now, let's just console .log event. Okay, and so when we press a key down, we are triggering an event, and the name of the key that we pressed is called event.key. Okay, and you can look this up using the documentation if you want to understand more. Every event gives you kind of different data that you can tap into. So I'm going to run my code again, and let's open the console here. And so you want to make sure that you're focused on your kind of game screen on the side here. You could do that by just clicking inside of it, because if you're not focused on that area, then you won't be able to pick it up. So you can see that I'm pressing here different keys on my keyboard and different letters, and you can see that basically we're consoling those letters. So what's important to us is we need to know what it will say when we press on one of the arrow keys. So here you can see it's arrow up, arrow left, arrow right, arrow down. Okay, so these are basically what we're going to be listening out for. Okay, and what I'm going to do here on the top is I'm just going to create an array, and let's call this directions. And in here, I'm going to put this arrow up, arrow left, arrow right, arrow down. But one thing that I'm going to make sure of is that it is in the same order as the arrows that we have on the board. So, you know what, I'm going to erase all this, and I'm just going to write here arrow left, and then we have arrow up, and then the next one we have is arrow down, and the last one we have is arrow right. Okay, and basically, whoops, to save up here, and basically when we press a key down, we're going to want to check if that key is equal to something. Just for example, let me show you how it's going to look. So if event.key is equal to directions directions 2, then console.log yay. Okay, and now you'll see that if I press the left arrow, make sure you're focused again. And if I press the left arrow, you see arrow left, but there's no yay, right arrow. But if I press up, if I press down, then you can see that I'm getting also that yay. So basically, what we want to do is we want to keep track of which arrow is the arrow that should be pressed down. And the way we're going to do that is by basically measuring the distance between the new arrow that's created and these arrows up here. And then we know that once it travels that distance and it reaches this area, then that is the time that we should be clicking up. And one more thing that we need to keep track of is which arrow is the active arrow in each new animated row that we're creating. So let's start with that. So the way we're going to keep track of that data is by using a tag inside each element, which is just called data. And basically it just allows us to attach information to an element that wouldn't be visible in any way on the DOM. So we're going to do that inside our createRow function. And basically before we even deal with this for loop over here, let's just set that attribute to new row. So it's going to be new row, and we're going to be setting an attribute. And that attribute is, we're just going to call it data, and I'm going to call it active. Okay, it's like this is the active arrow in the row. And we're going to set it as the randomizer. Okay, which is the position in the array of directions that this arrow is. And then basically later on, we can basically get this attribute and use it to determine which arrow should be the one that's being pressed. Okay, so let's start with figuring out which arrow is the active arrow. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to be setting up another function which will basically measure the distance between the new row that was generated and the board, and it will be timing and it'll set an interval at which we will tell our game that this is the active arrow. So in order to keep track of this state of which is the active arrow, let's just say active. We're going to declare a new variable up here. Active is equal to, we'll start it off as null. Okay, and basically each time a row is the active row, then we will change this variable. So let's actually use let over here because this is going to be changing. And now let's go to our animate row. Okay, so before we even animate this row, we're going to want to set a timeout. Okay, and basically a timeout is a countdown. So it counts a certain amount of time, and then after that time, it changes, it executes a certain function. And let's say first we set it as I don't know, 2 seconds. Okay, so inside this function, what we're going to do is we're going to say active is equal to row. Okay. Whoops. And the next thing that I want to do is find a place where we could just console the row. So let's actually put that right in here in our handle key down. And every time we press a key down, what I want to do is I want to see what is the active row. Okay, because this really mimics what we're going to be doing later on. So let's run our code. And okay, you can see it's kind of returning an object here for the for the active row. So let's tap into one of the attributes. So let's actually get back active dot get attribute, and let's get that data active. Attribute. Okay, and let's see what happens now. Okay, so in the beginning you could see that it was null, so when I tried to call get attribute it came back null, but later on you can see that each time the number is different, and this number is reflecting the the row that came in 2 seconds before that. Okay, so now we actually just really need to calculate the distance between the arrow generator and the board, and we can do that kind of each time that we generate a new row. So we're going to want to do that right before we set our timeout, and the way that we're going to do that is by using something that is called get bounding client rect. So for our row, let's declare a new variable, and let's just call it row top. Okay, so it's going to be measuring the top of where our new row is, and that'll be equal to row dot get bounding, quite a mouthful, client rect. And then in this object that comes back, we're going to be tapping into top, okay, because it gives us back the entire bounding rectangle, but we actually just want the top attribute. And this next thing that we're going to want is we're going to want the board top. Let's see how we're going to get the top of the board. So we're going to get the top of the board in the same way. So let's just say, and this will be equal to board dot get bounding client rect and dot top. Okay, and let's just say I'm going to call this proximity, and that's just going to measure the distance between row top and board top. Sorry, it should be a minus. And since I'm doing it this way, because since row is lower down, it's going to have a higher pixel value for its top. So this will give us a positive, return a positive number, which will just be a little easier to work with. And basically what we want to do is use this proximity to decide when the row should be active. So let's say we want this row to be active slightly before it reaches the top, and slightly after. So let's calculate this. So basically, currently we're animating our rows at one. This is kind of 1 pixel per millisecond. Okay, so per 1 millisecond. Okay, so that means that basically to measure the proximity, we just need to know how many pixels, which is basically proximity. Okay, but we also want to make it active a little before it reaches the proximity. So let's say just minus 100, okay, to make it easy. And then what we want to do here is in our handle key down, right? So we're getting the active dot get attribute data active. So basically, let's call this active arrow. Okay, and let's say that when we have the key down event, let's say pressed key will be equal to event.key. And basically we want to check for equality between these two things. So if pressed key is equal to the active arrow, then console.log yay. Okay? And let's also have an else. Console.log miss. Okay, that should be in quotation marks. Okay, so let's try running our code. And I'll spread this out just so it's a little more visual. And let's pull our console up over here. And let's run our code. Okay, so our arrows started popping up. And now I'm going to try and press the arrows accordingly. So, all right, remember to be focused in. Miss, okay. So let's see, miss again. Oops. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of misses here, which is leading me to think that we might have some kind of issue. So let's go and check out our code, and let's try logging a little more information when we press down our key. So let's actually, each time we press down our key, let's console.log active arrow and pressed key, and let's just move this down so it's after we declare our variables. And let's try running our code again. So okay, so here's our issue. That basically event.key is a string, but we are actually keeping track of numbers in terms of our key press. Okay, so basically we need to find a way to change these strings into numbers. And that is basically why we created this directions array up here. So basically what we want to do is that each time we have a pressed key, we are actually going to find the index of our direction direction array. So the way that that's going to work is that we are going to use our directions array, and we are going to use a method called findIndex. Okay, and basically in this method, what we need to do is we need to say, okay, so for each direction, okay, each item in our array, what we want to do is we want to see if that direction is equal to event.key. And if it is equal, then it will return that index. And if it's not equal, then it will not. So basically this pressed key will actually just become our index of our array. So let's try running our code again and seeing how we do here. So remember to be focused. And okay, directions is not defined, so let's okay, we do have directions up here. It must be just some kind of spelling mistake, so I'm just going to copy this over and paste that over there. Excellent. Let's try running the code again. Miss, but we see that they are both numbers. Okay, so the one reason that I think that these might both be miss is if you look really, really closely at the screen, you'll see that one of these is a string and one of these is an integer. Okay, and you can see because they're different colors. One is black and one is blue. And this is a common problem, but we can easily solve it by just taking down the level of equality that we are looking for. So here you can see we're looking for complete equality, also in type. But if I just take one of these equation marks away, then we are actually going to be looking for incomplete equality. So even if one is a string and one is an integer, this should still work. So let's try that again. And, whoops, remember to be focused. Yay! Okay, see, I got it right. Miss. Okay, I got it wrong, but you can see that it is wrong, okay, because I had 3, 0 there. And basically, whenever it's two of the same number, it should be yay, and if not, then it should be a miss. So that is pretty much, now we're about like 70% way there. So that's all for today's video. Just to recap, what we did is we learned how to listen in for the key down event and how to determine which arrow is the active arrow and how to make the comparison between those two so that we basically can see if the player is clicking down on the correct key or not. And we logged that in our console in terms of yay and miss, as well as working through a few bugs that we encountered on the way. So I would say we're about 70% done. Basically what we're going to want to do next is just give the player some kind of feedback because they're not looking at the console, obviously. And we're going to want to give them an audio, a visual feedback telling them that they either got the right arrow or not, and that is going to be what we're going to do in next video. So if you like this video, please don't forget to give a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.